Born to the working class. John Griffith London was born on January 12, 1876, in San Francisco, California. His unmarried mother, Flora Wellman, came from a wealthy family, and many historians believe London's biological father was William Henry Cheney, 1821 to 1903. Cheney was a journalist and lawyer, but he made a name for himself in the developing world of American astrology, the study of planets, and how they may affect human behavior and characteristics. No one knows without doubt about who fathered London. His birth certificate was destroyed in the fires of the Great San Francisco earthquake in 1906, see box. That tragic earthquake would be covered in a magazine article by London, and would be considered one of the most moving accounts of the earthquake. London's mother was sick often, so he was raised mostly by a former slave named Virginia Prentice. Later in 1876, his mother married John London, a veteran of the Civil War, 1861–65. The family moved to West Oakland, where London completed grade school. He would later write of being poor as a child, but his family was actually of the working class. London's teenage years were spent working at various jobs, many of them involved with the sea. For a time, he served on a patrol in the San Francisco Bay that scouted out and captured poachers, men who fished illegally. He also sailed the Pacific Ocean on a sealing ship. Once he became accustomed to the traveling life, London traversed the country. He enjoyed moving around. At 19, he returned home to attend high school. Through his travels and experiences with various individuals and cultures, London came to consider himself a socialist, someone who believes in the public ownership of the means of production and distribution of wealth. In comparison, a capitalist believes in an economic system based on private ownership of business, and the ability for businesses to compete. America's economic system is capitalistic. Socialists view capitalism as the root of poverty and believe that equal distribution of wealth would put an end to the divisions of social class. London unsuccessfully ran for mayor of Oakland, California, on the Socialist Party ticket several times. Becomes a writer. Many writers cannot recall a time when they did not write. For them, writing is something they felt they were born to do. This was not the case with London. He saw writing as a means to make money. He studied other writers and practiced mimicking their style as he began to submit jokes, poems, and short stories for publications. Most of these early attempts failed. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906. At 5:15 on the morning of Wednesday, April 18, 1906, the quiet slumber of San Francisco's hundreds of thousands of residents was interrupted by a rumble such as they had never heard before. Although the powerful earthquake was over in 1 minute, the fires it caused raged for 3 days, destroying much of the West Coast's most densely populated and economically developed city. That earthquake was not the most powerful ever experienced in the state or country, but it was the closest to a highly populated metropolitan area. City streets rolled up and down as if they were waves on the ocean. Tall buildings collapsed, killing and trapping not only pedestrians but occupants as well. In all, the Great Quake destroyed 28,000 buildings over 490 city blocks. More than 250,000 residents were left homeless. Estimates of those killed reached 3,000. Estimates of total damage to the city peaked at $350 million. According to eyewitness Adolphus Bush, whose words are recorded on eyewitness-history.com, the most terrible thing I saw was the futile, pointless struggle of a policeman and others to rescue a man who was pinned down in the burning wreckage. The helpless man watched it in silence till the fire began burning his feet. Then he screamed and begged to be killed. The policeman took his name and address and shot him through the head. In London's report of the tragedy, the first night after the earthquake found San Francisco not riotous, but absolutely calm and still. Wrote London, there was no hysteria, panic, no disorder. In all those terrible hours I saw not one woman who wept, not one man who was excited, not one person who was in the slightest degree panic-stricken. The same could not be reported about what happened as the fires continued to ravage the city. Evacuation efforts via ferries were made, and complete chaos took over. Men and women fought for seats on the escaping ferry boats, children had their clothing torn from their backs as people tried to pull them to the ground in order to get on the boat in front of them. Finally, the flames died out on Friday. Firefighters had given all they had, mostly in vain, to put out the fire. In the end, the flames had to run their course and burn themselves out. London spent the winter of 1897 in the Yukon, at the time part of the Northwest Territories in the Northwest region of Canada. A year later, it became its own territory. There, he joined thousands of others in the search for gold. The Yukon Gold Rush began in July 1897 when two ships docked in San Francisco Bay and Seattle, Washington. On board both ships were miners, carrying the gold they had found in the Yukon Territory. Suddenly, America was immersed in the gold rush craze, and London was among the hopeful gold prospectors seeking the gold deposits found naturally in the earth and in rivers and streams. Although not successful as a gold prospector, London did manage to write about his adventures. Those exploits were first published in the magazine Overland Monthly in 1899. From that point on, America could not get enough of London's stories. He met the demand. Rarely a day passed that he did not write something. Between 1900 and 1916, he wrote more than 50 novels and hundreds of short stories and articles. His routine was to write no fewer than 1,000 words a day, early in the morning. Rises to celebrity status. The first decade of the 20th century was busy for London. In 1900, he married his friend, Bess Maddern. Based on deep friendship rather than love, the union was one of many of its kind during that era, when men of importance chose women of good breeding for their wives. London and Maddern had 2 daughters, but the marriage did not last. In 1903, London and his wife divorced, and he married his secretary, Charmian Kittredge, in 1905. Throughout their lives, the two would call each other mate, and their marriage lasted until London's death at the age of 40. The couple's only child, Joy, died just 38 hours after birth. London had written his first novel, The Son of the Wolf, in 1900. In 1903, London wrote what would become one of his most famous novels, an adventure tale titled The Call of the Wild. It was quickly followed by the books The Sea Wolf, 1904, and White Fang, 1906. In between writing and researching his novels, London continued to write magazine features, both fiction and non-fiction. He maintained a heavy correspondence with readers, who wrote about 10,000 letters to him each year. London's writing appealed to readers across the globe. He was the highest-paid writer of his time. His critics, however, called him a hack, someone who churns out writing that is popular with the public, but has little literary merit. They accused him of sensationalism, writing to gain attention, because he often used his power as a popular author to discuss topics he believed were important, such as socialism and women's suffrage, the right to vote. The accusation of being a sensationalist, modern critics recognize, may stem more from London's choice of words. He preferred strong words over precise words than his choice of topics. Beauty Ranch. Open space was important to London. As an adventurer, he had developed a strong connection to both land and sea. In June 1905, he and Charmian were living in Glen Ellen, California. For $7,000, London bought the Hill Ranch in Sonoma Valley, 130 acres, 0.53 square kilometers, of trees, fields, streams and springs, canyons, hills, and a variety of wildlife. By 1913, he had made 6 more land purchases, and was the proud owner of Beauty Ranch, an estate comprising 1,400 acres, 5.67 square kilometers. The ranch was actually an experimental farm, where London promoted the concept of scientific breeding, for the best and strongest features, of animals, and even imported European purebreds to improve the quality of his stock. He was a pioneer in soil conservation, and used tilling, overturning many layers of soil, and terracing, shaping a slope into steps to prevent soil erosion, to improve the quality of soil on the hillsides. In addition to growing grapes, London planted vegetables, fruit trees, grass for hay, and even cacti. In 1911, London and his wife began building their dream home. The sprawling Wolf House was built of redwood trees, the roof made of imported Spanish tiles. By 1913, London had invested approximately $80,000 in the house, and it was nearly complete. On August 22, final cleanup began, and the couple made plans for moving their custom-built furniture into the house. At 2 a.m., London got word that his house was on fire. Nothing could be done to save the building, and the writer was crushed as he watched his dreams go up in smoke. Worse yet, he felt that someone had deliberately set fire to the Wolf House. Investigations into the tragedy showed that the fire probably started because someone had left oil-soaked rags at the scene. The mystery was never solved, and the house was never rebuilt. Cruises on the Snark. The Londons were determined to sail around the world in a yacht designed by Jack. The plan was to take 7 years for the voyage, but the reality of the trip was far different. After spending $30,000 to build the yacht, which he named Snark, the Londons traveled to Hawaii, Tahiti, Samoa, and the Solomon Islands. A severe case of sun poisoning forced the couple and their small crew to sail for land in Australia, where doctors told London he could not spend any more time in the sun. The voyage, which began in 1907, lasted just a little over 2 years, and the Londons returned home, heartbroken. Immerses self in work. After 2 great disappointments, the fire and interrupted voyage, London was a depressed man. He traveled to New York as well as to San Francisco and Los Angeles on business, and he spent much of his writing time on his boat, the Roamer. His wife coaxed him into returning to Hawaii in 1915 and again in 1916. Each time, he spent months there, writing and relaxing. London could never relax for long, however, when he thought about life at Beauty Ranch and all that he wanted to get done there. Because he was forever trying to expand his property and ranch, London was constantly in debt and under pressure to write. London's doctors were concerned about his health and urged him to cut back on the use of alcohol and improve his diet. London refused and remained focused on writing, so that he could fund his interests. He pushed himself to the limit, and on November 22, 1916, London died of uremia, toxins in the bloodstream. He was just 40 years old. For years, he had suffered from a painful kidney disorder, which could have only been made worse by his drinking alcohol. There has been speculation that London killed himself by overdosing on the painkiller morphine, but no evidence has ever been found to support that claim. The world was in shock. As reported on the Jack London online collection website, London's good friend, George Sterling, 1869–1926, remarked upon hearing of his friend's passing, "His greatness will surge triumphantly above race in time." London's novels and books have been translated into several dozen languages, and his works remain popular overseas. For those readers, London's books give them insight into the American character and all its contradictions. They provide understandable commentaries on key historic movements and events as well. In 1959, London's nephew gave the state of California 39 acres, 0.16 square kilometers, of London's beloved Beauty Ranch. On October 1, 1960, the state held a dedication ceremony marking the opening of the Jack London State Historic Park. Between 1977 and 1979, the state purchased another 756 acres, 3.06 square kilometers, from the family and enlarged the park to nearly 800 acres, 3.24 square kilometers.